Welcome back to the channel, guys. My name is Turtle. This is Outlier Fantasy. I'm sorry if my voice sounds a little run down. Had a long Labor Day weekend. Hope you all had a wonderful Labor Day weekend. But now, draft season is officially over, and now we have to start shifting our focus and attention to what fantasy football games are going on each and every week. So in this video today, we're going to be talking about every single matchup in week 1 and my personal breakdown on who you should start and who you should be monitoring very closely to see if you need to add them to your roster or not. Let's start with the very first matchup that we're going to get on Thursday night, which is the Chiefs versus the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, you're starting all of your Chiefs and Ravens players. That goes without saying. But maybe you would consider looking to start somebody else if you had a quality wide receiver and didn't have to play Zay Flowers. Now, I understand you probably drafted Zay Flowers to be one of your better wide receivers and somebody that's penciled into your lineup every week, but it does concern me that he's going up against the Chiefs secondary. No, they don't have L'Jarius Sneed anymore as he's moved on to Tennessee, but this is still a really top-notch defense that could easily take away Zay Flowers on opening weekend. Obviously, now things could be a lot different with Trent McDuffie as the only cornerback that they have with all-pro caliber, but he is still a very good corner in his own right. Starting Zay Flowers in this kind of scares me. If you play in a DFS format and you wanted to participate in Thursday Night Football and put out a lineup, I would say maybe look elsewhere than Zay Flowers because I'm a little more concerned about the matchup there versus how good of a matchup it is for running backs like a Derrick Henry or a mobile quarterback such as Lamar Jackson who loves to take off and run. For more of like an injury breakdown, Marquise Hollywood Brown is not going to be playing in week 1, so that elevates the value of an Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, of course. Travis Kelce obviously is a must-start player. You don't need to watch fantasy football YouTube videos to understand that you need to be playing him every single week. Mark Andrews and his injury concerns does not bother me. He is back at practice and looks like he is expected to go fully for week 1. So if you have Mark Andrews, I wouldn't be panicking if you see a Q next to his name. Start him. He's one of the best tight ends in the league for a reason, and he should be fine. Now moving our focus to Friday night, we have a wonderful game in Brazil that's going to be very fantasy friendly for both teams, and that's going to be the Green Bay Packers versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Last season, Philadelphia was 26th in terms of fantasy points allowed to the quarterback position, and I know last year's defensive stats shouldn't be a full-out indicator as to what we should expect in 2024, but given there hasn't been any key significant upgrades for them and they lost a guy like Hassan Reddick, I would say that being that the secondary is still one of the weaker parts of this defense, that you should be expecting a very, very good fantasy week from somebody like Jordan Love. The Eagles last season showed us that they don't really contain or stop any good fantasy players from doing their thing, so we really like Jordan Love this week. I think Josh Jacobs, who I'm not very high on season long, should be somebody that gets a lot of volume and opportunity and action in this Friday night game. And I also really like what this means, given that I've mentioned already how poor the Eagles secondary has been and continue to not really add much to it, that guys like Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, and Dontavian Wicks should be playable this week. Now on to the other side of the football, talking about the Philadelphia Eagles offensive players. The Green Bay Packers, though they have a fantastic cornerback in Jair Alexander, this was a team that didn't really contain or lock up any wide receivers. So I think that obviously if you have A.J. Brown, he's always good to go. But Devontae Smith should also be elevated as these guys should have one of their better games this week. And somebody like Saquon Barkley is going to be absolutely fed. So I think all around in this Friday night game, if you have anybody going in this game, you should definitely be playing them and you should definitely feel really confident about the potential that they could bring to your fantasy football teams. Now on to the first 1 o'clock game that would be on Sunday, or one of the first, I should say, because they all start at the same time. The Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Atlanta Falcons. And I'm a little concerned about Kirk Cousins in this game because the Steelers defense has always been really tough against quarterbacks. And not to mention, this is a 1 o'clock Kirk Cousins game, so you should be seeing a better side of him, but I'm just not too sold given that the Pittsburgh Steelers can really get after the quarterback. And if we're talking about the Atlanta Falcons offense, it should be noted that Bijan Robinson has a very exploitable matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers as they didn't do a very good job of containing the run last season. So obviously we love Bijan Robinson, but we love Bijan Robinson even more given this matchup. We know the game is in Atlanta, so this is a dome, so the running backs should have no problem in terms of any weather or any restrictions like that. And the same was obviously for the wide receivers. But keeping it more so to the running back conversation, Jaylen Warren should be back this week. I would play him if you have him. Maybe I would hold off on somebody like Najee Harris because we don't really know too much about how his workload is going to be handled, given that this is going to be a tough matchup for the running backs in general. But Jaylen Warren's PPR upside should be able to push him through a not-so-easy matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. We spoke about the quarterbacks in this matchup. Well, one quarterback, because I don't really want to give any advice to start the other quarterback. And we spoke about running backs. So now let's talk about wide receivers, where if you drafted George Pickens, you're probably going to have to start him, though. AJ Terrell is going to shadow him around, and I don't like that matchup whatsoever. So, again, if you play in like a daily fantasy, maybe avoid George Pickens for the first week. But Drake London is also going to have a really tough matchup against the Steelers, given that if the Steelers could get after the quarterback position, it's going to make things a lot tougher to get somebody like Drake London the ball. And keep in mind, Drake London last year was somebody we had high hopes on, just like we do this year. And he came out in the first game of the season and dropped exactly 0 points. That's right. 0 points, 0 catches for 0 yards. I'm not saying it's going to happen again, but we know that bust aspect of Drake London's game is always going to be there, and I feel like this in week 1 could be a game where he has one of his worst games of the season, unfortunately. Moving on to the next matchup of the Sunday afternoon slate, that would be the Giants and Vikings. Going to keep it very short, very simple. If Jordan Addison is playing week 1, which he should be, we're going to start him as long as he's fully healthy and there's no restrictions. And obviously we start Justin Jefferson. If you have the running backs, Aaron Jones, probably draft him to be a starter. You're going to have to roll him out. And Devin Singletary has a very tough matchup with the Minnesota Vikings defense. They're a little more susceptible to the passing attack than they are the running backs. But given that Devin Singletary is going to be working exclusively as the feature back for the Giants, still feel like you have to start him, but just tread carefully with that one. Moving on now to the next matchup, the Jacksonville Jaguars are playing the Dolphins in Miami, and I feel like this has the potential to be a almost track meet game where it's a lot of high scoring, a lot of action, and very, very fantasy football friendly, which is what we like. So if you got some Jaguars on your team, if you have the Dolphins, you're definitely playing them with confidence, obviously, because the Dolphins offense is always a great lineup to play. But even the Jacksonville Jaguars this week should be a little elevated than normal projections. I would even feel confident in playing a guy like Brian Thomas Jr., even though it's his first game. We have no idea what kind of workload he's going to get. Somebody that I'm keeping my eyes on this weekend in this matchup is Jonnu Smith, the tight end for the Miami Dolphins, because if they're using him a lot in motion and they're using him a lot to stretch the field vertically to help kind of keep one-on-one coverage or safety help over the top for Waddle and Tyreek Hill, that's going to leave the middle of the field a lot for Jonnu Smith to get involved and potentially be somebody that we want to add in fantasy, as it's pretty normal for tight ends to just come up out of the woodworks and just become top 10 fantasy guys when they were irrelevant in seasons past. Though Jonnu Smith has a history of being fantasy relevant, last year he wasn't so relevant, 2 years ago he wasn't so relevant. So now, given that he's in a system that he could thrive in, I'm monitoring him, and I'd be willing to use fab on him if he had a good game in week 1, knowing that he could be one of those potential tight ends that starts to break out this year. Now, Patriots and Bengals. For the Patriots side of the football, let's just be honest, Ramondre Stevenson right now is the only startable player on the Patriots until we see otherwise, and probably going to need to see multiple weeks of action from a Jalen Polk or a Demario Douglas before we go ahead and anoint them as flex play candidates this year. Let's just keep it simple for week 1. Keep it to just Ramondre Stevenson. And for the other side of the football, you could play every single Bengal that you have. I mean, if you have Mike Gesicki, maybe that would be the one to be like, just chill out. But I'm sure a lot of you don't have him rostered to begin with. But the typical guys, Joe Burrow, you're firing up with confidence. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins cannot be taken out of your lineups. And Chase Brown and Zach Moss should equally have an interesting opportunity to get going in their own ways, given that one in Chase Brown is more of a pass-catching back, and Zach Moss is more of a downhill runner who could score touchdowns in this game. Moving on to the next matchup, Bills and Cardinals. Obviously, Buffalo Bills players are always a good start in fantasy. You're never going to sit them for a bad matchup, so that doesn't apply here with the Cardinals, even if it was a tough matchup for them. And for the Cardinals, you're going to play Kyler Murray, of course, if you drafted him. You're going to play Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, if you drafted him. And James Conner should be a fine play this week as well. But somebody that I'm going to keep my eye on and be monitoring is somebody like Greg Dortch with the suspension of Zay Jones. This has an opportunity for Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch to kind of fight for that wide receiver 2 role. And most teams do have Michael Wilson drafted and stashed as a breakout guy. This is somebody that we're almost trying to anoint as the next guy in the offense or the wide receiver 2 without seeing it over a large sample size. Though what we've seen of Michael Wilson in years past has looked very promising. Greg Dortch has also proven that he can get it done. So I like to keep my eyes on Greg Dortch this week as somebody that maybe I might end up waiver adding to potentially be a flex play down the road for my teams. This is going to be another fantasy-friendly matchup. The Texans last year could not contain any good quarterback play, so Anthony Richardson's going to get a plus. And for the Indianapolis Colts, they could not stop the running backs, so somebody like Joe Mixon definitely gets upgraded to somebody that's just, slightly better than a middle-of-the-pack RB2 this week. If you were fortunate enough to get one of the trio of Texans wide receivers, you're going to play them with confidence. That's all good. And, of course, somebody like Michael Pittman can't be benched just because of how talented he is. So, yeah, you're going to start all those guys that you drafted just like normal. I know it sounds very conservative for me to keep saying these things over and over, but until we see otherwise, I can't really advise going against these guys. This next matchup I find really interesting. It's the Bears and the Titans, and Vegas has the point spread at 45.5, and the Bears defense is pretty good, so I'm not really too sure where Vegas sees all these points coming from. It might just be all Chicago Bears in this one, but it seems like this is going to be a fantasy-friendly matchup this week in Week 1. It's going to be one of the higher scoring, according to Vegas, of course, 1 o'clock games that we see on Sunday afternoon, so Caleb Williams, DJ Moore, even though he may be shadowed by a guy like L'Jarius Sneed, all the Bears wide receivers should be in play for something interesting. If you feel like you want to start Rome Odunze, you can. I don't think he needs to be forced in lineups this week, but it seems like it could be a good matchup for him. For the Titans side of the football, Calvin Ridley should be a really good play, even though he will be shadowed by Jalen Johnson most likely because nobody else, unless DeAndre Hopkins is ready to go Week 1, will take away any of that wide receiver 1 opportunities that the Tennessee Titans could provide. Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard, if you have those guys on your team, I would feel good about playing either one of them, but just know this is likely going to be a situation where they're not both going to have a good game, but they're going to feed whoever ends up getting hot. So if that's Tony Pollard and you have Pollard, great. If you have Tyjae Spears, great. Now we're going to move on to Panthers-Saints. Probably not going to have many guys going in this matchup, and I totally understand not wanting to draft many Saints or Carolina Panthers players, but Deontay Johnson, instant lock into your lineup. Chris Olave and Alvin Kamara also instant locks into your lineup, and I wouldn't really be concerned about starting anybody else in this game, as could be one of the lower scoring games that we get in the first week of the season. I'm keeping my eye on Bryce Young this weekend. I will not be picking him up or saying that you need to pick him up if he has a good game this week, but I'm somewhat of a Bryce truther myself, and I think that this could be a good bounce back season for the kid. Now we're going to move on to some of the 4 o'clock games in the 4:25 slots. Now we're going to start with the Raiders and the Chargers. At the time of me recording this video, it is Monday. Have not heard anything about Justin Herbert being 100% ready to go in Week 1, but being that he's back at practice, he's out of the boot. I personally, if I was the GM of the Chargers, I would just tell him to sit out one more week. But if he plays and you're in a 1-quarterback league, you probably weren't looking to start him anyways. You probably had somebody else that you feel a little more confident in. But in a 2-quarterback, in a super flex format, you can go ahead and play Justin Herbert as long as he is playing, because there's no doubt he's definitely one of the more talented quarterbacks in the league. Kobe Myers and Devontae Adams should be excellent plays this week, as the secondary is one of the weaker parts of the Chargers defense. They gave up a lot of points last year, but I'm not expecting that with a new coaching regime to be the same case. But we should feel pretty good about the wide receivers in this matchup, especially if they're going to end up trailing in this game. You can play the running backs in Zamir White and Gus Edwards. They both have favorable matchups, but my gut tells me that I'm not really loving the idea of starting a Zamir White, because if they go down and they're ending up trailing, Zamir White falls out of the game script, so I would be careful about that. Again, for my DFS players, if he's on the pricier side and you don't feel like he's a budget, I would stay away from a guy like Zamir White this weekend. Now, looking at the Broncos-Seahawks matchup, I personally think that if you have the guys, obviously there aren't many desirable players on the Denver Broncos, but if you have guys playing in this matchup, I think this is a really fantasy-friendly matchup, and I'll tell you why. Last season, the Seattle Seahawks could not contain running backs, and given that Sean Payton loves to scheme up plays where they throw to the running back, Javonte Williams and Jaleel McLaughlin could be quality plays this week if you had them and you needed to start them, I would feel pretty good about going ahead and starting both of them. The Denver Broncos are also a really tough defense for wide receivers. So we're going to start DK Metcalf. We're not going to overthink the matchup too much, but maybe I wouldn't be forcing a JSN or Tyler Lockett into my lineup just yet. Next up is the Cowboys versus the Browns. And I got to be honest, I really don't like too many players in this matchup. Obviously, you're playing CeeDee Lamb. He was your first round pick. You're going to be rolling out Amari Cooper. You're going to be rolling out Dak Prescott. And then you're going to play the two tight ends, Jake Ferguson and David Njoku. But that's it. I really wouldn't be starting Ezekiel Elliott. I wouldn't be starting Rico Dowdle till we see how much workload Rico Dowdle's going to get. I know rumors are running around now and reports are coming out that he's looking to be the starting running back, the guy that takes most of the work. Browns defense is going to be tough against them. So I don't think it's a matchup that we need to force or a lineup play that has to be made. But if you play in DFS, you see Rico Dowdle's maybe a budget guy, I would consider playing him in that situation. But other than that, I wouldn't be forcing any of these other guys into your lineups this weekend. Now, time for the final 425 slated game. That would be the Commanders and the Bucs. I think this is going to be a good game, not for fantasy purposes, just an intense back and forth matchup. You're obviously playing Jaden Daniels if you drafted him. Should be a pretty good quarterback. Baker Mayfield in a two-quarterback superflex format. I think this is a good play. The Washington Commanders were not very good against the quarterback position last year in fantasy, so they were actually the worst. So I would be looking to take advantage of that. Something to be mindful of. This is a whole new looking defense for the Washington Commanders. Dan Quinn, head coach now. He should be looking to bring a new defensive identity to this team. So I do like that. Of course, you're going to be playing Mike Evans and Chris Godwin if you drafted them. That's totally fine. Maybe they don't have as good of a matchup as you would have hoped and expected. Rachaad White, definitely going to be a good matchup for him in this one. The only guy I really would be saying not to force into your lineups just yet is probably somebody like a Austin Eckler, who we don't know how much workload he's going to be getting in the first game of the season. But somebody I'll be monitoring and keeping my eyes on is Ben Sinnott, the tight end, or just the tight end room for the Commanders in general. Rookie quarterbacks love to throw to the tight end. So if Zach Ertz pops off and has a good game, maybe I'll consider waiver adding him. And if somebody like Ben Sinnott ends up playing more snaps and you get to see him more lined up in the backfield as a running back or a fullback, I would be interested in drafting him as well, as long as the Commanders are utilizing him properly. Moving on to the Sunday night game, this is probably going to be one of the better fantasy matchups you can have this weekend. That would be the Rams and the Lions. You're starting all your Rams. You're starting all your Lions. I'm not too concerned about the Jahmyr Gibbs injury. I would still be playing him. David Montgomery, put him in your lineups. Everyone should be able to eat in this one. And finally, the Jets versus the Niners. You're going to be playing your CMC, your Debo Ayuk. Again, this is a no-brainer. Play your George Kittles. But I think Garrett Wilson's going to have a really, really good game in this one. He's already pretty much valued according to his ADP as a, top wide receiver. He's in that wide receiver 1 territory, so it's no surprise if he actually does have a good game. But I like this matchup for him. As long as Aaron Rodgers doesn't get hurt in the opening drive, he should have a really good game against the 49ers. And I would be just a little worried about how good Breece Hall can be against this defense. But obviously, I'm not saying don't start him. I'm just saying he may be limited. Don't panic if you feel like he's limited. They may roll out a little more Braylon Allen than you expected. But again, don't jump to conclusions. Don't overreach. Don't think that Braylon Allen right away is going to be somebody that you have to add on waivers. They're just probably going to use a different back approach to kind of get the 49ers, a little uncomfortable and trying to figure out what they're doing on offense. But wow, that was a really long, lengthy video. Sorry if you stuck around and watched the entire thing. But if you did stick around and watch the entire thing, thank you so much. If you're new to the channel and you like fantasy football content, feel free to subscribe. If you like this video, you like fantasy football content, and you're super excited that week 1 is here and we're all ready to go, make sure you smash that like button because I can't wait for fantasy football to finally be back. We're just a couple days away and I'm so excited. But that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching again. Let me know in the comments, though, if you think I missed out on somebody, you have any start-sit questions. I'd love to answer all your comments. I always try to get back to each and every one of you, especially those that leave positive comments. I appreciate all of that. That's all I have for you guys today. The next video will probably end up being some kind of like waiver wire watch. Who do I like after the week 1 games are over? But Thank you so much for watching. My name is Turtle. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.